There are things that happen at the edge of the known world that never make it into the press release. Not because they are lies, not because someone is hiding the truth in a vault beneath a government building, but because some truths are so structurally unsettling, so fundamentally incompatible with the story we tell ourselves about control and progress and the safety of human ambition, that the institutions responsible for sending human beings into the void simply do not have the language to explain them. Artemis II was supposed to be a triumph. 4 astronauts, a crude lunar flyby, the first human beings to travel beyond low Earth orbit in more than 50 years. The photographs were pristine. The mission patch was elegant. The speeches at Kennedy Space Center carried that particular gravity that only comes when an entire civilization decides simultaneously that it is watching history. And it was history. But history has layers. The surface layer is what gets broadcast. The press conference, the smiles, the technical debrief, the carefully worded summaries about orbital mechanics and life support margins and crew health assessments. That surface layer is real. It happened. Every number checks out. But beneath that surface, there is another layer. And it is made of something far older and far less cooperative than any mission timeline. It is made of the moon itself. Consider what that means for a moment. Not the moon as a symbol, not the moon as a destination on a checklist. The moon as a physical object, a world, a dead world, or so we call it. Suspended 239,000 miles from everything you have ever touched, everything you have ever breathed, everything that has ever kept you alive. A world with no atmosphere to scatter light into the soft gradients your visual cortex expects. A world where shadows are not shadows in any sense your nervous system was built to process. They are absolute. They are walls of black so total, so geometrically brutal, that the human brain, the same brain that evolved in jungles and savannas under a diffuse, forgiving sky, does not know what to do with them. The astronauts aboard Artemis II passed within approximately 8,000 kilometers of the lunar surface at closest approach. Close enough to see it not as a disk in the sky, but as a terrain, a landscape, a place with a horizon. And the horizon of the moon does something to the mind. It does not curve the way Earth's horizon curves, gently, reassuringly, implying a world that continues beyond your line of sight. The lunar horizon is sharp, violent. It ends, and beyond it, instead of the pale atmospheric blue that softens every human view of the edge of the world, there is nothing. There is the black, the actual black, not the night sky you see from your backyard, polluted with the ambient glow of civilization. The black that exists when there is no atmosphere, no scattering, no mercy. A black in which the stars do not twinkle. They do not breathe. They are fixed, hard, and absolutely indifferent. This is what 4 human beings flew into, and what they came back with. Not in their official reports, but in the pauses between sentences. In the metabolic data logged by their biosensors, in the documented surge of cortisol that peaked not during any mechanical anomaly, but during the quiet transit through the moon's shadow, tells a story that no mission patch was designed to hold. This is that story. To understand what the Artemis II crew encountered, you first have to dismantle every assumption you carry about what a world is supposed to feel like. You were born on a planet that is, by every cosmic measure, an extraordinary accident of comfort. The atmosphere above your head is not simply air. It is armor. It is a pressure blanket 14.7 pounds per square inch, pressing against every cell of your body, so constant so perfectly calibrated to your biology that you have never once felt it. It is a radiation filter that absorbs the most energetic particles the sun throws at us every single second. It is a thermal buffer that takes the sun's raw heat on one side and the minus 270 degrees Celsius void on the other, and produces, in the narrow band between them, a temperature range in which liquid water can exist on an open surface. And it is a scattering medium, a vast ocean of gas molecules that takes white light from a star 93 million miles away and breaks it into that particular blue that you have looked at your entire life without ever questioning whether it is a gift. The moon has none of this. Not a trace, not an approximation, not a remnant. The lunar surface is exposed to the universe in a way that nothing in your evolutionary history prepared you to comprehend. The solar wind, a continuous stream of charged particles, protons and electrons and alpha particles moving at 400 kilometers per second, strikes the moon's surface directly, without deflection, without mercy. On Earth, the magnetic field funnels these particles away, channels them toward the poles where they produce the aurora borealis, a beautiful exhaust valve for energies that would otherwise strip the atmosphere and sterilize the surface. The moon has no global magnetic field worth measuring. The solar wind hits the regolith, that fine, razor-sharp, glass-laced powder that covers every square meter of the lunar surface, and it deposits its charge directly into the rock. The moon is electrically active in ways that are still not fully understood. Near the terminator, the line between the lunar day and the lunar night, electrostatic forces lift fine dust particles into low trajectories above the surface, creating a ghostly haze that early Apollo astronauts described and that scientists spent decades arguing was impossible. It was not impossible. It was simply the moon being the moon. Now place a human being inside a spacecraft flying through this environment, not on the surface. Artemis II did not land, but in transit in the cislunar space that connects the Earth to the moon, a region of space that is emptier than any vacuum a laboratory on Earth has ever produced, and simultaneously more irradiated than any place a human being has ever intentionally traveled to since the last lunar missions ended in 1972. The radiation environment in cislunar space is not like the radiation you think about when you think about X-rays or nuclear reactors. Those are point sources, localized, directional, shieldable with sufficient mass between you and the origin. Cosmic radiation in deep space is omnidirectional. It comes from everywhere. It comes from the sun in the form of solar energetic particles that can arrive with almost no warning during a solar storm, escalating from background levels to lethal dosages in hours. It comes from outside the solar system in the form of galactic cosmic rays, high-energy nuclei of atoms, some of them traveling at fractions of the speed of light, remnants of supernovae that exploded millions of years ago in other parts of the galaxy, carrying energy so extreme that they pass through the walls of a spacecraft as if the metal is not there. And when a galactic cosmic ray passes through a human skull, through the fluid, through the neural tissue, it leaves a track, a physical scar at the cellular level. It ionizes the molecules it touches. It can break a strand of DNA. And it produces, in the darkness behind the closed eyes of an astronaut at rest, a flash of light. Not metaphorical light, actual perceived light. A streak or a spot or a diffuse glow that appears inside the visual cortex as the particle's energy cascades through the photoreceptors or stimulates the optical nerve directly. Apollo astronauts reported this phenomenon and were not entirely believed until the physics was confirmed. It has been documented in every extended spaceflight since. Astronauts on the International Space Station report it regularly. But the International Space Station sits inside the Earth's magnetosphere. It is partially protected. The dosage is manageable. Artemis II flew beyond the magnetosphere. For the duration of their transit, for the hours they spent in the deep cislunar corridor and in the proximity of the Moon, the crew was outside the protective bubble that has sheltered every form of life on this planet for 4 billion years. They were exposed to the full, unfiltered energy budget of a violent universe. And inside the cabin, in the quiet moments between the system checks and meal periods and the ordinary rhythms of human biological maintenance, the radiation was writing itself directly onto their nervous systems in the form of light that appeared from nowhere, in the form of phosphine trails that moved across their vision in the absolute dark, in the form of an experience that has no analog in any human sensory vocabulary because nothing in the history of human evolution ever required us to develop the language for it. Think about what that means philosophically for a moment. Consider the architecture of human perception. Every sensation you have ever had, every color, every texture, every sound, every pain, and every pleasure has arrived through a sensory organ that evolved specifically to translate one narrow band of physical reality into neural signals your brain can process. Your eyes did not evolve to see X-rays or detect magnetic fields. Your ears did not evolve to hear ultrasound. Your skin did not evolve to sense cosmic radiation. You are, in the most literal physical sense, a narrow band receiver in a full-spectrum universe. The vast majority of what exists around you at this moment is entirely invisible to you. Not because it is not there, but because you were never built to perceive it. The astronauts on Artemis II were built for Earth. Every millimeter of their physiology was shaped by 4 billion years of evolution in one specific environment, under one specific sky, shielded by one specific magnetic field, fed by one specific atmospheric pressure, cooled and warmed by one specific combination of thermal variables. And they flew out of all of it in a metal capsule the size of a large living room. The psychological literature on isolation and confinement in extreme environments is extensive. Studies from Antarctic winter overstations, from submarine deployments, from long-duration spaceflight simulations, all converge on a phenomenon that researchers call the overview effect in its positive form and existential confrontation in its less romantic presentation. The overview effect is well documented. Astronauts see the Earth from space and are overwhelmed by its beauty, its fragility, the absurdity of political borders when viewed from orbit. Carl Sagan wrote about it. Astronauts have wept about it in interviews for decades. But the overview effect has a shadow. That shadow has a less frequently cited name. Some researchers call it the break-off phenomenon. Some call it space euphoria. Some avoid naming it at all in public documents because the naming of it implies that something about extended spaceflight does something to the human mind that is not entirely under control. The break-off phenomenon was first described by high-altitude pilots who, at the edge of the atmosphere, began to feel a dissociation from the Earth below. Not fear, not disorientation in the clinical sense. Something more unsettling, a feeling of profound separation, a feeling that the connection between the self and the world of origin had become geometrically, philosophically, irreversibly attenuated. Now move that pilot from the upper atmosphere to a point 239,000 miles from Earth. Give them a window. Let them look. The Earth, from lunar distance, is approximately 2 degrees of arc across. That means it fits with room to spare behind the width of 2 fingers held at arm's length. The planet that contains every ocean, every mountain range, every city, every forest, every person you have ever known, every language ever spoken, every war ever fought, every piece of music ever composed, every child ever born, every grave ever dug, fits behind 2 fingers. It is not a metaphor. It is a measurement. It is the actual angular diameter of the Earth as seen from the Moon, calculable from first principles, verifiable with a protractor and a piece of graph paper. And it is blue, and it is moving, and it is impossibly, heartbreakingly small. The Artemis II crew saw this, not in a photograph, not on a screen, through actual windows, with their actual eyes, for actual hours, and the science of what happens to a human nervous system when it is presented with that image. In that context, under those radiation conditions, in that silence, because there is no sound in space. The capsule generates its own noise, but outside the hull, there is a silence so absolute that it functions less as an absence of sound and more as a physical presence, a pressure of nothingness that the human ear has no mechanism for processing. That science is not fully written yet. Some of what they experienced has been described in post-mission psychological evaluations. Some of it exists in the cortisol curves and heart rate variability data logged automatically by the biomedical monitoring systems that track crew health continuously throughout a mission. Some of it lives only in the language that astronauts use when they talk to each other, quietly in the weeks after returning, in conversations that never become press conferences. The Moon, approaching in that window, growing from a disk to a world, from a world to a terrain, was not a passive destination. It was a mirror. And what it reflected back at 4 human beings hurtling toward it in a pressurized shell at thousands of kilometers per hour was not glory. It was not the triumphant narrative of a spacefaring civilization. It was something older and more honest, and considerably harder to incorporate into a mission summary. It was the scale of their own smallness, not as an insult, not as a defeat, but as a fact, a cold, luminous, physically measurable fact, of the same ontological class as the gravitational constant or the speed of light. The smallness of a human being relative to the universe is not a philosophical opinion. It is a number. It is a ratio. And when you are inside that ratio, when you are not calculating it on paper but living it with your body, when the evidence is not in a textbook but in the window in front of your face, that number does something to the architecture of the self that no amount of training can fully prepare you for. Because training happens on Earth. And the Moon is not Earth. And the space between them is not a hallway. It is the first chapter of infinity. The Moon is described in almost every casual reference as dead. It is a word chosen for its efficiency. It communicates in a single syllable the absence of atmosphere, the absence of liquid water, the absence of tectonic activity, the absence of the biological processes that make Earth's surface a continuously rewritten document of living chemistry. Dead is the word we reach for when we want to say that nothing is happening, that the story is over, that whatever this place once was, it has finished becoming. But dead is the wrong word, not because it is inaccurate, but because it is insufficient, because it implies a stillness, a passivity, a settled finality that the Moon does not actually possess. The Moon is not still. The Moon is not passive. The Moon is not finished. It is simply operating on timescales and through mechanisms that the human nervous system calibrated for the rhythms of a living planet, is not naturally equipped to perceive. Consider the surface. The lunar regolith, that word that sounds clinical and sterile, is one of the most mechanically hostile materials in the solar system. It is not soil in any sense that word carries on Earth. Soil on Earth is a biological product. It is the result of millions of years of rock being broken down, not just by physical forces, but by living organisms, by the acids secreted by roots, by the mechanical work of earthworms and fungi and bacteria, by freeze-thaw cycles mediated by liquid water. Soil is alive. Soil is the excretion of an ecosystem. Lunar regolith is the excretion of violence. It is rock that has been pulverized by 4.5 billion years of meteorite impacts, large and small, ranging from objects the size of cities to objects smaller than a grain of sand, striking the surface at speeds between 12 and 70 kilometers per second, releasing energies that vaporize rock, melt it, throw it in ballistic arcs across hundreds of kilometers, and deposit it again in layers that record every catastrophe in geological stratigraphy. The regolith is a library written in impact glass and pulverized basalt, and its pages are measured in meters of compressed violence. But the physical danger of the regolith goes beyond its origin story. The particles themselves, at the microscopic level, are not rounded. Rock that is broken down by water and wind on Earth becomes smooth over time. The edges are abraded. The particles tumble against each other in streams and rivers and ocean currents until their corners are gone. Lunar regolith particles have never touched water. They have never been tumbled. Each particle, examined under a microscope, looks like a fragment of broken glass. Jagged, angular, electrostatically charged, clingy in a way that goes beyond normal adhesion. The particles bond to surfaces at the molecular level, driven by the same electrostatic forces generated by the solar wind bombardment described earlier. Apollo astronauts found that lunar dust penetrated seals that were designed to be impenetrable. It scratched visors that were made of materials rated for space environments. It coated equipment in a fine abrasive layer that degraded mechanical function. It got inside gloves and caused skin abrasion through the suit material during extended EVA. And when samples were brought back to Earth and stored in sealed containers, and those containers were opened months later, the dust still had its charge, still clung, still scratched. It is a material that the universe spent 4.5 billion years making as hostile to human contact as physics allows. And beneath that surface, the history written in rock goes deeper than any drill yet deployed has fully read. The moon formed, according to the best current understanding, from catastrophe approximately 4.5 billion years ago in the early solar system, when the planets were still being assembled from the disk of gas and dust surrounding the young sun. A body roughly the size of Mars, a protoplanet that has been given the name Theia, struck the proto-Earth in a collision so violent that it defies easy analogy. The impact was not a collision in the sense that the word implies two solid objects bouncing off each other. It was a merger of two partially molten worlds. The energies involved were sufficient to vaporize rock on a global scale. The Earth and Theia did not simply hit each other. They partially merged, partially vaporized, and the debris, a ring of molten rock and vapor orbiting the newly reconstituted Earth, gradually coalesced under gravity into the moon. This means the moon is made of Earth. Not metaphorically, literally. The isotopic ratios of oxygen in lunar rocks, the specific proportions of oxygen-16 and oxygen-17 and oxygen-18, match Earth's ratios with a precision that is not found anywhere else in the solar system. Mars rocks have different ratios. Asteroids have different ratios. The Moon has Earth's signature, because the Moon is, in the most direct, physical sense, a piece of Earth that was thrown into orbit by the most violent event in this planet's history. And it has been watching us ever since. That last sentence is not mysticism. It is geometry. The Moon is tidally locked to Earth, meaning that the same hemisphere always faces us, a consequence of the gravitational interaction between the two bodies over billions of years, gradually slowing the Moon's rotation until it matched its orbital period exactly. The Moon rotates once for every orbit it completes. The near side, the side you see every night, is the side that has been facing Earth since before the first single-celled organism existed in the oceans below. The far side, the side that no human eye saw until a Soviet spacecraft photographed it in 1959. The side that no human being saw directly until Apollo 8 flew around the Moon in 1968. Was invisible to every human being who ever lived before the 20th century. And the far side is different. Not subtly different. Structurally, geologically, dramatically different. The near side is covered in the dark basaltic plains called Maria, seas named by astronomers who mistook them for actual water, which are the result of extensive volcanic flooding early in the Moon's history. The far side has almost none of these plains. The far side is dominated by highlands, ancient cratered terrain, the oldest rock on the Moon. The crust on the far side is thicker. The topography is rougher. The record of the earliest bombardment period is written there more completely because the volcanic flooding that smoothed and resurfaced much of the near side never reached the far side with the same intensity. Why the two hemispheres are so different is still not fully resolved. The asymmetry is one of the genuine open questions of planetary science. The explanations that have been proposed range from differential heating during the Moon's early molten phase to the possibility that the early Moon had a second smaller companion that eventually merged with the far side in a slow, low-velocity collision that piled up highland material rather than excavating a crater. That second hypothesis, two moons of Earth eventually becoming one, is taken seriously in the scientific literature. It is not fringe. It is a peer-reviewed proposal that explains the crustal asymmetry better than the alternatives. The Moon may be the remnant of a collision within a collision, a catastrophe born of another catastrophe. Now consider the scale of the impact craters that cover both hemispheres. The largest confirmed impact structure on the Moon is the South Pole Aitken Basin, located on the far side. It is approximately 2,500 kilometers across. For context, that is roughly the distance from New York City to Denver. It is one of the largest confirmed impact craters in the entire solar system. Its depth reaches approximately 8 kilometers below the surrounding terrain. The impactor that created it was likely a body hundreds of kilometers in diameter, striking with an energy release measured in units that require scientific notation to write without losing meaning. And this is not ancient history in the way that phrase is usually intended. Ancient history, in human terms, means Greece and Rome and Mesopotamia. Ancient history, in geological terms, means a few 100 million years. The South Pole Aitken Basin is ancient in the deepest sense. It formed during the late heavy bombardment, a period between approximately 4 and 3.8 billion years ago when the inner solar system was being systematically devastated by a surge of impactors, the cause of which is still debated, the consequences of which shaped every rocky world in the solar system, including Earth, whose own record of that bombardment was erased by plate tectonics and erosion, while the Moon, geologically quiet, preserved it in stone. The Moon is a record that Earth cannot keep of its own history. It is an external hard drive for the biography of the inner solar system, written in craters and mineral layers and isotopic signatures. Readable in principle, but requiring instruments and patience, and a willingness to sit with the discomfort of a timeline so vast that it makes every human civilization look like a footnote on a footnote. When the Artemis II crew looked at the lunar surface from their closest approach distance, they were not looking at a static landscape. They were looking at a document. Every crater visible in that terrain represents an event, an impact, an energy release. A moment in the biography of the solar system. The smallest craters, visible only from orbit or on the surface with the naked eye, were made by objects that in many cases no longer exist, that were destroyed in the act of making the mark they left behind. The largest craters are windows into the interior of the moon, excavations so deep that they brought up material from the mantle, from below the crust, from layers that have not seen sunlight since the moon formed. And looking at all of this from a spacecraft window, with no atmospheric haze to soften the distances, with the terminator, the boundary between lunar day and lunar night, casting shadows of absolute black across terrain that has not changed in millions of years. The mind does something involuntary. It tries to place itself in time, and it fails. Not because the mind is weak, because the task is genuinely beyond the resolution of human intuition. 4.5 billion years is not a number that a nervous system built on the rhythms of seasons and generations and lifetimes can actually process into felt understanding. The words exist. The integer is writable. But the actual duration, the actual weight of that much elapsed time, cannot be held in conscious experience the way you can hold the memory of last Tuesday, or the felt understanding of how long a decade has been. The astronauts approaching the moon were approaching an object older than every living thing that has ever existed, older than every fossil ever dug from any rock on any continent, older than the oceans, older than the atmosphere. A companion to Earth since before life had invented the cell nucleus. And it is silent, not silent in the way a library is silent, or the way a forest is silent at dawn, where the silence is a temporary condition, an absence of sound that could be broken at any moment by the crack of a branch or the whisper of a page turning. Silent in the way that physics is silent when there is no medium for sound to travel through. Silent in the way that the vacuum itself is silent, which is not merely quiet, but categorically, absolutely, permanently, without the vibration of pressure waves. The moon has no air to carry sound. Nothing that happens on the surface of the moon, no impact, no rock slide, no microseismic tremor, produces any sound that any instrument outside the surface would ever detect. The moon is an event that no one can hear, and that silence, translated through the hull of a spacecraft as a kind of sensory absence, as a negation of one entire channel of human environmental perception, does something to the brain that is difficult to articulate but physiologically measurable. Humans in environments of extreme sensory reduction begin to generate their own input. The auditory cortex, deprived of external signal, does not go quiet. It begins to fill the silence with what some researchers call neural noise, faint, sourceless sounds at the edge of perception, sounds that are not there, produced by a nervous system that was never designed to function in an environment without ambient acoustic information. The moon did not produce these sounds. The astronauts' own nervous systems did. And this is the most unsettling implication of the entire encounter, the one that the mission summaries have no column for. The line between the world and the mind perceiving the world becomes, in the extreme environment of lunar space, genuinely difficult to locate. What the astronauts saw was real. What they heard, in the margins of their own neurology, was generated internally. What they felt, that dissociative pull, that attenuated connection to the life they left behind on the blue disk shrinking behind them, was simultaneously a psychological response and a physically accurate assessment of their situation. They were, by every objective measure, among the most isolated human beings in the history of the species. And the moon was not indifferent to their presence the way a wall is indifferent. It was indifferent the way the universe is indifferent, completely, cosmically, without the possibility of otherwise. It had no mechanism for awareness, no capacity for acknowledgement. It was 4.5 billion years old, and it had seen the solar system's most violent epoch, and it had recorded the passage of geological time in its craters and its layers and its razor-sharp regolith. And 4 human beings flew past it in a metal shell, and it noticed nothing. And somehow, that is the most frightening fact of all. Not that the moon is dangerous, not that space is hostile, but that the universe in its totality does not notice. That the most sophisticated, self-aware, emotionally complex organisms that 4 billion years of evolution on this planet have produced can fly to the edge of the world that formed them and stand at the window of everything they have ever been and look out at the oldest rock in the solar system. And the universe does not even register the looking. The moon holds no record of the Artemis II mission. Only we do. And the question that follows from that, quietly, inevitably, in the silence between the system's checks and the biomedical readouts and the carefully worded debrief transcripts, is not a question about the moon at all. It is a question about us, about what it means to be the kind of thing that notices, the kind of thing that looks, the kind of thing that travels 239,000 miles from everything that made it, and keeps records and asks what it all means, and comes home changed by a world that never knew it was there. There is a version of sunlight that you have never seen. Every photon of solar energy that has ever touched your skin, every ray of light that has ever entered your eye and triggered the cascade of photochemistry that your brain translates into color and warmth and the particular gold of a late afternoon, every single one of those photons has been processed, filtered, softened, scattered, absorbed, re-emitted, and delivered to you secondhand by an atmosphere that acts as the most sophisticated optical system in the known solar system. The light you know is not raw sunlight. It is sunlight that has been civilized by 70 miles of air. In lunar space, there is no atmosphere. The sunlight that strikes the hull of a spacecraft between the Earth and the Moon is not the sunlight of a summer afternoon. It is a direct, unmediated, full-spectrum electromagnetic assault from a fusion reactor burning at 15 million degrees Celsius at its core and 5,500 degrees at its surface, delivering energy across a bandwidth that runs from long-wave infrared through visible light, through ultraviolet, through X-rays, all of it arriving simultaneously, without the selective absorption and scattering that your atmosphere performs automatically and invisibly every moment of every day. The solar constant, the total energy per unit area delivered by the sun at the Earth's distance, is approximately 1,361 watts per square meter. That is the number before the atmosphere processes it. By the time that energy reaches you on the surface, it has been reduced and redistributed. But in space, at the same orbital distance, every square meter of surface facing the sun receives the full 1,361 watts. The side of the Orion capsule facing the sun was being heated with an intensity that would, without the spacecraft's thermal control systems, raise the surface temperature to levels incompatible with both human survival and the structural integrity of most engineering materials. The side facing away from the sun, simultaneously, was exposed to the thermal sink of deep space. A background temperature of approximately 2.7 Kelvin, just barely above absolute zero. The cosmic microwave background radiation left over from the Big Bang, the faint thermal echo of the universe's first 380,000 years, cooling to its current temperature over 13.8 billion years. So the spacecraft existed at every moment of its transit in a thermal gradient between two extremes that are not simply hot and cold in the ordinary sense. They are the two defining thermal boundaries of the observable universe. The maximum temperature achievable by a star-powered surface in this solar system on one side. The minimum temperature permitted by the laws of thermodynamics in an expanding universe on the other. And between those two extremes, in a pressurized vessel the diameter of a large dining room table, 4 human beings maintain their core body temperatures within a fraction of a degree of 37 Celsius using technology and engineering and the extraordinary thermal regulation systems of their own biology. The margin between life and physics, out there, is not a comfortable margin. It is an engineering achievement measured in millimeters of insulation and fractions of a degree. Now consider what the sunlight looks like in that environment. On Earth, you cannot look directly at the sun. The intensity is damaging even through the atmosphere. In space, without any filtering, looking toward the sun is an act that would cause permanent retinal damage in fractions of a second. The sun in space is not the warm yellow disk of a temperate afternoon. It is white, blazing, absolute white. Without the atmospheric reddening that gives it color at sunrise and sunset. It is a point source of such intensity that it functions less like a light in a room and more like a hole burned through the fabric of the sky, a place where the spectrum simply overloads. And around it, made visible only by the contrast of the absolute black that space provides, the corona, the sun's outer atmosphere, normally invisible from Earth except during a total solar eclipse, extends outward in streamers and plumes of magnetized plasma that reach for millions of kilometers in every direction. This is the structure that drives the solar wind. This is the architecture of the force that strips atmospheres from unprotected worlds, that charge the lunar regolith, that writes aurora on the magnetic poles of planets, lucky enough to have them. From Earth, you see the corona for minutes. During the rare geometry of a total eclipse, through an atmosphere that still softens the view. In cislunar space, the corona is simply present. Always. A permanent feature of the sky, visible to instruments, if not always to the naked eye. A reminder that the sun is not a distant, benign point of light, but an active, dynamic, violently energetic star, with an atmosphere that extends far enough to include the orbit of every planet in the solar system. The Earth orbits inside the sun's corona. So does the moon. So did the Artemis II spacecraft, the heliosphere, the vast bubble of solar wind influence that extends beyond the orbit of Neptune, past the Kuiper belt, out to the heliopause where the solar wind meets the interstellar medium, is, in the most technically accurate sense, the outer boundary of the sun's atmosphere. Everything within it, including Earth, including every planet, including every spacecraft ever launched, is inside the sun. Not inside the fusion core, not inside the photosphere, but inside the diffuse outer envelope of a star. We do not live on a planet orbiting a distant star. We live inside a star's atmosphere, on a planet that orbits its core. The distinction seems semantic until you are in cislunar space, and the evidence of that atmosphere is pressing against your spacecraft's hull at 400 kilometers per second. And the instruments are logging the particle flux, and the dosimetry readings are accumulating. And you understand, physically, viscerally, that the protection you have taken for granted your entire life was never the absence of danger. It was the continuous, tireless, invisible work of a magnetic field and an atmosphere that never once asked for acknowledgement. But it is not the sunlight that produces the most psychologically transformative experience for astronauts in deep space. It is the stars. On Earth, the stars are a performance. They appear after sunset, competing with the scattered light of the atmosphere and the glow of human civilization. And they twinkle. That characteristic scintillation that poets have celebrated for millennia, but that is, in physical terms, simply the distortion of starlight by turbulent pockets of atmosphere at different temperatures and densities, bending the light as it passes through. The twinkling is not a property of the stars. It is a property of our air. The stars themselves are absolutely steady. We just cannot see them that way from the surface. In space, there is no atmosphere to scatter or distort. The stars do not twinkle. They are fixed, hard, steady points of light in a black so complete that the contrast between the light and the dark is at its physical maximum. And they are everywhere. Above, below, to every side. The entire celestial sphere, unobstructed, present at once in a 360-degree panorama that no ground-based or even orbital observation can approximate. And they are more numerous than anything a human being standing on the surface of Earth can prepare for. The limiting magnitude of the human eye under perfect dark sky conditions on Earth's surface is approximately 6 to 6.5, meaning that the faintest stars visible to the naked eye are those producing roughly 6 magnitudes of brightness above the threshold of human rod cell detection. Under those conditions, on the darkest night at the highest altitude, you can see approximately 5,000 stars with the naked eye. That number sounds large. It is not. The Milky Way galaxy contains somewhere between 100 billion and 400 billion stars. 5,000 is not even a rounding error on that number. It is the rough equivalent of being able to see 5 individual grains of sand from an entire beach that stretches beyond the horizon in every direction. In space, with no atmosphere and no light pollution, the number of stars visible to the naked eye increases substantially. And more importantly, the faint structures that are invisible from Earth's surface become accessible. The Milky Way, which most people alive today have never seen clearly due to light pollution, becomes not a faint smear across part of the sky, but the dominant visual feature of the entire celestial sphere. A dense, luminous, three-dimensional river of stars that arches overhead in both directions, not flat but structural. Not a band, but a galaxy. Your galaxy. Seen from inside, with the central bulge blazing in the direction of Sagittarius and the disk extending in both directions until it wraps around the entire sky. The astronauts on Artemis II could see that their star, the Sun, is located approximately 26,000 light-years from the galactic center. That is a distance so large that light, traveling at 299,792 kilometers per second, would require 26,000 years to cover it. 26,000 years ago, modern humans were in the middle of the Upper Paleolithic. The last glacial maximum was approaching. there were no cities, no writing, no agriculture, no metals. The entire recorded history of human civilization, from the first clay tablets to the spacecraft currently orbiting the Earth, occupies less time than the distance between the Sun and the galactic center, measured in light travel time. And the Sun is not even close to the center. It is in the outer third of the galactic disk, in a relatively sparse region between two of the galaxy's major spiral arms, in a quiet suburban neighborhood of the Milky Way that has the advantage, from the perspective of complex life, of being far from the violent, radiation-saturated environments near the galactic core. When the Artemis II crew looked at the Milky Way from cislunar space, they were looking at a structure that contains roughly 400 billion suns. Many of those suns have planets. Many of those planets are in the habitable zones of their stars, the range of orbital distances where liquid water can exist on a surface. The number of such planets in the galaxy alone is estimated in the hundreds of millions to billions. And the galaxy itself is one of perhaps 2 trillion galaxies in the observable universe. The sphere of space from which light has had time to reach us in the 13.8 billion years since the Big Bang. 2 trillion galaxies, each containing hundreds of billions of stars, each star potentially hosting worlds. These are not estimates designed to be impressive. They are the output of careful observational astronomy, of decades of telescope data and spectroscopic analysis and statistical inference applied to the deepest images ever captured of the sky. The Hubble Ultra-Deep Field Image, a photograph of a patch of sky so small it represents roughly 1/13 millionth of the total sky area, contains approximately 10,000 galaxies. Each of those galaxies contains billions of stars. That image covers an area of sky smaller than a grain of sand, held at arm's length. The universe is not large in a way that scales to human intuition. It is large in a way that breaks the scaling function entirely. Every analogy fails because every analogy draws on quantities within human experience to represent quantities that are exponentially beyond it. The number of stars in the observable universe, approximately 10 to the power of 24, a 1 followed by 24 zeros, exceeds the number of grains of sand on every beach and desert on Earth by a factor of roughly 10,000. And every one of those stars is, at minimum, a nuclear furnace. Most of them are burning hydrogen into helium through nuclear fusion, the same process that has powered the Sun for 4.5 billion years and will continue to power it for another 5 billion. The energy output of the Sun, 3.8 times 10 to the power of 26 watts, is produced every second, continuously, without interruption, without fuel replenishment in any human sense of the term. The Sun converts approximately 4 million metric tons of its own mass into energy every second through E equals mc squared. Einstein's equation that is not an abstraction, but the operating principle of every star in the observable universe. The night sky, seen from cislunar space, is not a ceiling with holes in it. It is a window into a machinery of energy production and gravitational dynamics and nuclear physics that has been running since before the solar system formed, that will continue to run long after the Sun has exhausted its hydrogen and expanded into a red giant and consumed the inner planets and collapsed into a white dwarf and cooled over trillions of years into a cold, dark remnant orbiting a galaxy that itself will have merged with Andromeda and reshaped into an elliptical galaxy bearing no resemblance to the spiral structure visible today. All of that future is written in the physics. The equations do not leave room for ambiguity. The fate of the Sun, the fate of the Earth, the fate of the galaxy is calculable from the laws that govern atomic nuclei in gravitational fields and thermodynamics. The universe is, in the most rigorous possible sense, a deterministic system evolving according to rules that have not changed since the first fraction of the first second after the Big Bang. Rules that were operating in full before any planet existed, before any star had formed from the cooling gas of the early universe, before chemistry had complexified enough to produce the first amino acids, the first self-replicating molecules, the first cells, the first nervous systems, the first eyes, the first minds capable of looking up and asking what they were looking at. The astronauts of Artemis II were those eyes, temporarily displaced from the thin shell of air and magnetism and biology that produced them. Floating in the machinery they had always been embedded in, but never directly perceived. Looking at a sky that their own sun had always been a part of, but that their atmosphere had always hidden. And the light reaching their eyes from the farthest visible objects had left its source before the Earth existed. Some of the photons striking the windows of the Orion capsule during the transit were ancient beyond any meaningful use of the word. The light from the Andromeda Galaxy, the nearest major galaxy to our own, has been traveling for 2.5 million years. It left Andromeda before the genus Homo existed on Earth, before the first stone tools, before the first deliberate fire. The photons that formed that image in the astronauts' retinas were already traveling through the void, when everything that would eventually become humanity was still a lineage of Australopithecines in the African savanna, not yet walking fully upright, not yet imagining anything, not yet looking up. The light is older than the looking, and that asymmetry between the age of the universe and the age of the awareness that perceives it is perhaps the most vertiginous fact that cislunar space delivers without ceremony, without mediation, without the comfortable distance of a textbook page or a planetarium ceiling. It arrives directly, through a window, into eyes that evolved in an African forest and never stopped looking up, even when looking up revealed something too large, too old, and too indifferent to hold, even when looking up revealed not a sky, but a scale, not a ceiling, but an abyss, not infinity as a concept, but infinity as an address, the address of every human being who has ever lived. Seen clearly, perhaps for the first time, from a small capsule suspended between two worlds, by 4 people who volunteered to go there and came back carrying something that does not fit in a sample container or a mission log, something that lives now in the part of the mind that does not generate press releases, the part that lies awake and remembers the stars. Every system in the human body was designed by evolution for a single, specific environment, not designed in the intentional sense, not engineered by a mind with a blueprint and a set of specifications, but shaped over 4 billion years of incremental modification by the relentless pressure of natural selection operating on every organism that ever lived and died on this planet, retaining the variations that improved survival and reproduction, discarding the ones that did not, building through an accumulation of microscopic changes a biology so precisely calibrated to the conditions of Earth that it functions, in those conditions, with an elegance that no human engineer has come close to replicating in any machine. The cardiovascular system is calibrated for one gravity. The vestibular system, the apparatus of balance and spatial orientation housed in the inner ear, is calibrated for one gravity. The skeletal system, with its load-bearing architecture of cortical and trabecular bone, is calibrated for one gravity. The immune system is calibrated for the specific microbial environment of Earth's surface. The circadian rhythm is calibrated for a 24-hour day, driven by the light-dark cycle of a planet rotating at a specific speed under a specific star at a specific distance. Take that body out of that environment and it begins, immediately and measurably, to come apart. Not catastrophically, not all at once. The human body is resilient in ways that are genuinely remarkable. But the changes begin within hours of departure from the conditions that shaped it, and they continue, accumulating, for the entire duration of the exposure. The body does not adapt to space the way it adapts to cold water or altitude or a new diet. It does not find a new equilibrium and stabilize. It degrades continuously along trajectories that are now well documented from decades of spaceflight data, and that the Artemis II crew experienced in full. In the first hours of microgravity, the cardiovascular system makes a catastrophic misreading of the situation. On Earth, gravity pulls blood toward the lower extremities. The cardiovascular system compensates with a continuous upward pumping effort, maintaining blood pressure in the upper body and brain against the constant downward pull. The moment gravity disappears, that downward pull disappears with it. The blood that was being pumped upward against gravity is suddenly being pumped upward into a vacuum of resistance. It floods toward the head and the upper body. The face swells. The sinuses engorge. The intracranial pressure rises. Astronauts describe this as the sensation of a permanent head cold. A fullness and pressure in the skull that does not resolve, that becomes the baseline condition of existence in microgravity. Because the cardiovascular system is doing exactly what it was evolved to do, in a context where those actions produce exactly the wrong result. The body perceives this fluid shift as a volume excess. The pressure sensors in the large vessels near the heart detect elevated pressure and conclude, reasonably by Earth standards, that the body contains too much fluid. They trigger the hormonal cascade that reduces fluid volume, suppressing antidiuretic hormone, increasing urine output, telling the kidneys to remove fluid from the bloodstream. The body begins, in a very literal sense, to drain itself in response to a pressure problem that